So real quick, sort of context setting from you guys. How many of you guys are doing paid user acquisition yourself? Anybody? A little bit? Okay. And anybody doing organic? Yeah? App Store optimization, things like that? Awesome. So I'm going to go into sort of growing mobile user acquisition by combining both paid and organic. I think it's a really interesting concept that doesn't get a whole lot of playtime, especially if you're thinking about as an indie developer. You guys, a lot of you folks probably have smaller budgets, not really sure whether or not you really want to spend a lot of money doing paid user acquisition. I think that's totally fair. There's ways in which you can do it that you can start to get really smart about how you're doing it and how it will impact the organic side of the world. So the last presenter was talking about, marketing is at least as important as the actual development of the app. I believe that's true too, and that segues really well into this. So just quick background about myself. I was the co-founder and CEO of a company called Mobile Dev HQ. That was a startup here in Seattle. We focused on App Store optimization and organic app marketing. So sort of all of the things that you can get for free, all the downloads that you can get for free essentially, whether that's search in the App Store, top charts, features. We do a lot of competitive intelligence, things like that. We were acquired by Tune in July of last year. Tune are the makers of mobile app tracking and has offers, so you may have heard us from that world as well. We are a fast-growing startup that you talked about. We have, when I joined last July, we had about 150 employees. We have about 270, 280 today worldwide. Most of our employees, all of our developers are in Seattle, in Belltown. So we are growing really fast, and we focus wholly on mobile marketing, essentially. So paid and organic. The paid side of the world, really fast, overview, recap for any of those who aren't doing it. By paid, I generally mean performance marketing, performance paid marketing for a mobile app. This is things like, Facebook app install ads, Twitter app install ads, any number of the ad networks who do this work. Whether you're paying CPC, CPM, CPI, whatever it is, kind of all lump that into the bucket. I consider both incentivized and non-incentivized in here as well. Where incentivized, for those of you who don't know, is sort of, I've created a poker app and the user runs out of chips. They can either buy more chips or they can watch an ad and I'll give them more chips, right? That way. And then on the organic side, as I mentioned, search is the primary one that I focus on, and in particular, search in the App Store. So how do you get people to actually see your app? What keywords do you want to rank for? How can you rank highly for those keywords? And then top charts, things like that as well on top of it. So if any of you guys came from the web side of the world, this is going to look very different. And I think it's something that's really unique to the app world and the mobile world. And that is that you can actually influence how you're doing on the paid side of the world, or how you're doing on the organic side of the world from how you're doing on the paid side of the world. And then that creates this virtuous cycle that doesn't really exist in the web anywhere today. So take that into a concrete example. On the web, you can pay Google a lot of money for AdWords, right? And get a lot of people to drive to your site. That will have no impact on how you rank on your organic SEO side of the world. In the App Store, it's actually different, right? And I'll talk about why that is. And this is sort of that lighter fluid that goes into it. So you can start with a paid campaign. And if that paid campaign is $100, if it's $1,000, or if you're Supercell and you're spending millions of dollars, right? It kind of doesn't matter. You start with the paid campaign, and that paid campaign will drive more downloads. That's the purpose of the campaign, right? So you're paying for downloads, you drive more downloads. That increases your download velocity, which is to say, how many downloads are you getting in a certain period, a certain time frame? Typically, that time frame, you want it to be compressed as tightly as possible, whether that's an hour or 6 hours, 24 hours on the sort of outside realm, right? And a lot of that is because of the way that the app stores work. They generally refresh on every few hour basis and are looking at what's going on in the last few hours. So you want to match your campaign to that world. This is often, burst campaigns is the primary example here. The increased velocity, the increased download velocity, will then increase your top charts ranking. And your top charts ranking is at least a majority based on how many downloads are you getting in a certain time period, right? So that by itself is the definition of what's going on there. And you can sort of see how this plays out really fast from that point on, right? But search ranking, it also is impacted by that. So search ranking, to a much lesser extent, will take into account how many downloads are you getting on a day-to-day basis. So once you sort of have these increased top charts ranking, increased search rankings, all of a sudden people are seeing your app more frequently in the App Store. Whether it's because they're searching for a term, they're going and browsing the top charts, whatever that is, it's happening, right? And that just sort of leads to this overall increased visibility that you see in the app stores. And then that increased visibility leads to more downloads, right? You rank highly in the top charts, you're obviously going to get more downloads. And then you can sort of take this end here and wrap it around to the beginning, where now you have more downloads and an increased velocity, and your rankings will continue to go up, right? And so you started with this lighter fluid on the paid side of the world, and you ended with this virtuous cycle of how is your download velocity impacting your rankings, how are your rankings impacting your download velocity. So that's a really powerful concept that's really hard to master. And that was all sort of theory, right? And maybe you guys are wondering whether or not that's true. It is in fact true. So we decided that one of the reasons why myself wanted to be acquired by Tune was that we wanted to see if this was actually true. And so we went and combined some of mobile app tracking's data on the paid side with some of the mobile dev HQ data on the organic side, and see, is there really a relationship between paid and organic in the App Store? And this is perhaps the most important chart that you'll see today on my slides, which is on the x-axis, number of paid installs. And then on the y-axis, number of organic installs. Each dot represents an app that we had data on. And so what you can see is that there is actually a nice correlation with the more paid installs you get, the more organic installs you get. Obviously, correlation, causation, not equal, but I really like that chart. I think it tells you something that you otherwise wouldn't have known, right? So what is that relationship actually equal to? Well, it's actually about 1.5x, meaning for every paid download that you get, you typically see about 1.5 organic downloads. That's obviously a huge number there that can really sort of dramatically increase your overall success as a developer. But a huge caveat to this is that it's very, very different for the entire App Store. That was the App Store as a whole, meaning not just games. We have games, we have transportation, lifestyle, utilities, whatever. All of that is lumped into that 1.5 times. This, obviously, the app stores are just very different, right? They're crowded by games. That makes it very hard for you guys to get noticed, but it also means that there's a lot of people out there who are searching for games, who are looking for games, browsing for games. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there, right, and a double-edged sword. So because not all apps are created equal, we took that to mean, or to ask ourselves the question, what does that multiplier, that 1.5, look like by category and by platform? So obviously iOS and Google Play work differently as well. And this is it actually broken out. So the reason that you don't necessarily see every category up here, and I apologize if this is small, but the reason that you don't see every category up here is that some categories just aren't significant for us to make a real judgment on. So we only kept this to the ones that we actually had good enough data to make real judgments on. And so on the left here, you can see some really interesting trends, especially if you're a game developer. So looking at Android, I'm just going to look at tools and personalization. So tools, the multiplier is 0.3, and personalization, the multiplier is 0.2. So what that means is that for every paid download that you purchase, you can really only expect to see about a third or a fifth of an organic download. That's obviously a lot smaller than the 1.5, but it kind of makes sense. Personalization, if you're an iOS user, on Android is generally things like wallpapers, stuff like that. Not things that people are really going out and searching for often and browsing for often, right? Like, it's a pretty uncommon use case going on there. So that makes sense that you would see that. On the flip side, the things that do really well are the things that you'd expect people to be searching and browsing for. So racing, right? Those are racing games. Adventure games, those are really big. Casual games are really big. All of those sit somewhere above 5, right? So for every paid download, you can typically see about 5 or more organic downloads. That is obviously crucial as you guys think about, hey, I have $10,000 to spend. Do I spend it and I get 10,000 downloads, at which point that may not actually return the LTV that I need, right? So if I say it was $1 a download and I got 10,000 downloads, but my LTV was 50 cents, that's obviously a money losing proposition. But if it actually meant that you got 50,000 downloads and it was 50 cents, well, all of a sudden you made 25K, and that was actually a really good way to spend some money. So you have to think about what is that calculation for you guys, and then all of a sudden spending money doesn't seem nearly as scary, right? On the right-hand side, you can see similarly on iOS, had a lot less significance on the data for iOS, so you see fewer categories. But the things that you'd expect sort of still break out, where games are really high, entertainment a little bit lower. Okay, so that was all really sort of high level. What is the concept of how paid and organic work together? My background is on the search side, as I said. I focus on the organic a lot. I also think the organic piece is something that indie developers can focus on more easily. You don't have huge budgets necessarily. So I want to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about what are the ways that you can actually take advantage of this concept. And this will be much more tactical side of the presentation. So on the paid side, you kind of have to think about all of the different channels. That's the big driver on the paid side. So burst campaigns versus sustained, right? So burst means can you do it all in a very short amount of time? When you're doing burst, are you focused on the right days of the week, the right times of the day? Right? So for games jump significantly over the weekend. Do you want to actually do this on Thursdays? Thursdays might put you in a good spot for Fridays, and then people start browsing the app stores over the weekend, and that virtuous cycle takes effect. You do it on a Monday or Tuesday, maybe it's a little bit cheaper, but you're not going to get nearly the dramatic effect that you would have had. So you're thinking about how to do that. On the sustained side, these are campaigns that you're just going to continue to do all the time. And maybe what you found is that your sort of key piece of your racing game is that you show up 5th for the term racing. But you found that your rating is really stable, your keywords are stable, everything is stable except your download velocity, and that's the one that you think might be sort of triggering your ranking to go up or down. And that you have to clear let's call it 10,000 downloads a day, 1,000 downloads a day, whatever the number is. And so you say, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to buy enough downloads to keep me at that position, because that's the position that sort of triggers this fall off, right? Like all of a sudden there's a cliff and you go down, and that's what you don't want to do. Alternative channels. This is a little bit outside of the world of indies. We see, obviously you see Supercell doing Super Bowl advertisements on TV all the time. King is on TV all the time. Those things actually work really well for those guys, especially as burst sort of style campaigns. The Super Bowl obviously drove a huge number of downloads in a very, very short amount of time. And you could see that in the top charts rankings as well. And then re-engagement. So don't forget that engagement matters to both top charts and search rankings. It's taken into account. It's something that people don't focus on a lot. But if you're struggling on the engagement side of the world, can you do re-engagement campaigns that bring people back into your app such that that will actually lift you in the rankings? That's an important piece of how to get paid and organic to work together. So on ASO, this is all of the pieces that you would have thought about, and I'll sort of dive into some of these. But what keywords are you using? How are you implementing those keywords? Do you want to focus on really sort of the head terms? Racing might be a head term. Maybe a longer tail term, a more targeted term would be something like, first-person racing game, something like that, right? Whatever it is. So obviously that the latter would have a lot less search volume. People would search for it less frequently, but you have a higher chance of ranking highly, and the people that will convert will likely be super high value users for you. So you have a risk-reward trade-off there. Maybe you start with that sort of ladder targeted term, and then as you can build up this base, you build out to something that's a little bit more head-oriented. That's one way to do it as well. Metadata is just sort of thinking about all of the metadata that you have on your app and how are you using it correctly, whether that's your icon, your screenshots, your description, all of that, the actual keyword field if you're on iOS. We actually are beta testing right now a tool that would allow you to do some of this testing, actual A/B testing of some of these things. Google Play is expected to release an A/B testing tool for their store at Google I/O coming up in a couple of weeks. That'll be pretty interesting. So there are ways to sort of get at some of this data if you want to really try and work at it. And I think it's hugely valuable. The folks that we see doing this get a lot of value out of it. And then ratings and reviews. So how do you actually impact your ratings and reviews? What can you do to force people to rate you well? What can you do to not have those negative reviews? Everything that I'm saying here today, completely white hat. I would never suggest that you try anything black hat. I've seen people do it, and it always ends up a failure in the app stores. It's not the web. There's a guardian of the app stores, right? Google and Apple guard those things, and they will kick you out, and they can kick you out. Just, it's not worth it. If you're actually building a business on this stuff, build the business. Don't try to cheat the system. Right? Okay, so these are some interesting pieces, really tactical pieces that have come out in the last sort of 6 months-ish. Really come out in the last 6 months. It's a little bit older when iOS 8 was actually launched, but really come out in the last 6 months as people have been using it. And so this was a survey that we did of our customers. A lot of these folks are sort of the larger app publishers of the world. And it's interesting to see how they responded to these types of questions. But basically what we did was we asked them, so there's been a bunch of new features for iOS 8. How are you thinking about them? How much effort are you spending on them? And then how much return do you think that you're getting from them, right? How many more downloads are you seeing, do you think? This is all sort of second party, right? So they are answering about themselves, but they do not necessarily have the data to know. So they're kind of guessing. Nobody really has the data to know on a lot of this stuff. But what you see is that a ton of people focused on the preview videos. Those are, in addition to screenshots, you now have videos, right? So a ton of people focused on that. But the actual impact to a lot of people, they don't actually believe was much. So they rolled those out and didn't see really any impact. So if you're an indie developer, that's actually kind of interesting because doing a really quality video can be pretty difficult and pretty costly. And maybe you actually just leave that out. That's a trade-off you can make, right? Meanwhile, there's a new feature that I'll show off, which is related searches. Related searches, if you haven't seen it, is in iOS 8. Basically allows you to see sort of, you search for this, other people search for these things, right? And people weren't focused too much on that, sort of middle of the road, but people actually really believe that this has a huge impact. And a lot of this is because you may not be able to rank for the head term that everybody's searching for, but now all of a sudden those slightly more targeted terms are being exposed to the consumer and exposed to the end user. So you try to rank for those guys, and you can, and you're seeing more traffic be shifted that way. So you can actually drive more downloads from there. The spotlight search is a really interesting one. Almost nobody focused on that, and people believe that had a downward impact on their downloads. I think that's people being upset that that it's just not as much. I really don't understand that answer. So I leave it up there because I think it's interesting, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions on it. So this is the related searches piece of the puzzle. I apologize again that it's small, but if you look sort of right below where it says flights, that was the search term that was put in. And then right below that it says related, and there's cheap flight. I believe it's flight deals and vacations comes up next, all of which are actually searched for less frequently. And so you can sort of see how it's easy now to take something that's searched for slightly less frequently and put that into your keywords, focus on ranking for that, and be able to get some good juice out of it. Similarly on the right-hand side. And then one thing that I'm going to say here is for the related searches, this is actually our product, and you can use our product to get at related searches really easily and nicely around the world. Like, it's free. I'm not actually pitching you on this stuff. Go use it if you'd like. But the caution that I would give is what's shown here, which is that you may want to go down a couple of levels. Don't go down too many levels. Right? So related searches gets bad really fast. So the example here is that you start with hotels. One of the related searches is cheap flight. That actually makes sense. Maybe you're, Expedia, and you want to rank for hotels. You can't rank for hotels. You want to know what a related search is. And so, oh, cheap flights is a related search. That's actually really good for me. I can totally try to get at that one. That makes a lot of sense. If you go down another level from cheap flight, you could go to air flight. That's hotels to air flight. Yeah, like, sure, I guess. That one's okay. I don't know how many people are searching for the term air flight, really. But then you go down one more level, and air flight is related to aircraft carrier games. And all of a sudden, you went from hotels to aircraft carrier games. And I can guarantee you that nobody searching for aircraft carrier games is going to care at all about Expedia, right? So that one, like, just make sure that you're still focused on relevance. Don't use this blindly, because it's just not going to work out for you if you're not if you're not actually really paying attention to what's going on there. Cool. Last thing that I'm going to say here, you have to be patient with this. So we see, depending on category and platform, that sort of virtuous cycle can take anywhere between 3 and 14 days. On the gaming side, it's actually faster, so that's good. But nonetheless, 3 days to 2 weeks is a pretty long lag time that you can feel as though what you're doing isn't helping at all, and you might shut it down, you might get scared. Just be patient and continue to iterate and test as you're doing it. That is what the data shows there. So that's all I have there. I'm happy to take any questions about marketing your apps in general, ASO in particular.
So I'll start off with a question.
Yeah.
What's the minimum budget that a small indie studio can get away with? And the idea of, if you just put a couple of dollars on there, you're never going to see the small percentage on there. So realistically, if you've got an indie game studio per month, what do you think you need to spend in order to be able to see a measurable performance?
I think it's hard to make that judgment. The ones that I see being really successful are if you're sort of doing, call it, you spend $100 in a month and it's like one pop, it's not going to do anything for you. If you're sort of spending, even $50 a day, but it's consistent, that's going to help you a lot, and I think can drive the results that you want, assuming that you've already figured out what your lifetime value is, how that actually works, right? Like, make sure you have that model set before you go and do it, because otherwise it's a pretty scary thing.
So in the old SEO days, it used to be being in 1 through 10 is orders of magnitude better than being through 11 through 20 and 21 through that. So the idea of, if I'm going to spend $100, I'll get a certain return. Spending $200, it's a nonlinear response. I'm going to get significantly more. It's much better to pump myself up into the top 20 or 30 rather than move myself from 95 to 91.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing exists.
Which is kind of related to the minimum spend sort of question. I do realistic. If I spend my budget spread over a long period of time, I've just wasted it. I put all my bets in one pile. And put it
yeah. So exactly, and that's where you have to think about the burst versus sustained, and make that judgment for yourself. But you can totally get away with that, and the stores have actually gotten better. So we often will do analyses on what percent of results are clicked on for number 1, number 2, right, and all the way down, and draw that graph out that you're talking about. And it used to be, especially before the last iOS change, when they were cards and you swiped horizontally, number 1 took home like 90 some odd percent, right? Like, it was everybody just clicked on number 1 because nobody knew how to scroll and nobody wanted to scroll horizontally, right? That is very different now that you can actually see a couple and scroll vertically, and people will flick a lot faster. So it's evened out a little bit. You can go further down the line now.
we have any other questions from the audience?
Cool.
Okay, so you're going to stay around for the rest of the day to answer questions?
I'll be around for a little while for sure.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you very much. It's now lunchtime. It's 12 o'clock.